Recently, I have become infatuated with a Japanese director that I happened to stumble upon, really by accident. I was watching the documentaries of Kazuo Hara, who I may do a video on later, when I was recommended an interesting sounding film called The Mazures and the Woman, and I couldn't help but watch it after reading the description. Today, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at what Japanese cinema could be like before the war. On this channel, I feel that every other video is about discussing the lingering effects of the war on Japanese storytelling and how the conflict is portrayed through the Japanese perspective. But today, I wanted to do the opposite. My main view into this pre-war time period in film comes from the directors Yasujiro Ozu and Hiroshi Shimizu. Though I have watched Kajiro Yamamoto's 1936 film, I Am a Cat, based on the Natsume novel of the same name. Maybe I will do a part 2 of Natsume in film and cover that movie along with Konichikawa's 1975 version as well. Anyway, considering I already did a video covering Ozu, I want to focus on Shimizu today. The earliest Shimizu film I've seen so far is Mr. Thank You. It is a Great Depression era story detailing a bus ride from the countryside to Tokyo. Already the film is a great insight into the time. The bus ride itself takes up the entirety of a day, and the film is rife with conversations and plot points relating to the economic slump the world was facing. Yet this is not a very worldly movie. It is actually quite hyper-focused, only viewing the depression from the perspective of a few select characters riding the bus, and the driver himself, Mr. Thank You. The movie is strikingly progressive given the day and age it was made in. My personal favorite interaction in this movie is when Mr. Thank You engages in conversations with a woman construction worker while at a stop. The woman and the other workers had spent tireless nights constructing the roads on which the bus rides, and yet with the money they are paid, they can't even afford to ride it. Mr. Thank You illegally offers her a free ride on the bus, but she refuses, maintaining that she will travel with her co-workers in a show of solidarity. Let's interrupt with a brief history lesson. In 1925, the Peace Preservation Law was passed in Japan, banning all political parties deemed dangerous to the state, mainly focusing on communist, socialist, and anarchist groups. In 1932, a professor for Kyoto University would be accused of being a Marxist for giving a lecture where he posited that crime should be viewed through a social lens rather than at an individual level. He was removed from his position, and a string of student protests in retaliation to this action would be put down by the police. This incident was later made into a fictional film by Akira Kurosawa in 1946, but more on that later. Jumping ahead to Shimizu's 1938 film, The Mazures and the Woman, a blind man working as a masseur, and if you can guess from the title, meets a woman at a secluded resort in the mountains. The woman, as it is revealed as the story progresses, is actually a thief. At the end of the film, Toku, the blind man, realizes that the police are on her trail, and as such leads her away from the inn and to safety. The woman proclaims her innocence and reveals the real reason why she has been acting suspicious. She has been on the run from a patron who is essentially hunting her down. Now, whether or not she is a thief is besides the point. Shimizu presents us with a character who we could understand why they would be a criminal, and instead of judging them by their individual behavior, the film seems to be asking us to look at it from a societal perspective. Assuming she is this thief, even if the evidence is circumstantial, the fault is placed not on her supposed wrongdoing, but on the very structure of her world. So it isn't exactly as if she has done nothing wrong, but it is inconsequential, pushed into a position where they have to act out in ways unbecoming of their society, allowing the power structure to have an excuse to deem them an outsider, as they always intended to do. The last Shimizu film I watched before the situation in Japan really began to get out of hand was 1940's Nobuko. The movie details a new teacher's struggles after moving into the city to teach after crossing paths with a particularly difficult student. What's striking about this film is how relevant it feels, which makes sense. It's a very universal story, and its basic elements can be applied to practically everyone's life who has gone through schooling. Yet with Shimizu's lens, the movie is ultimately quite special, and the only thing that lingers is simply my knowledge of the context it is in. not just in simply that less than 40 years after the film concludes Japan will be the target of hundreds of bombing raids. No, it is the knowledge that not only was the film released on the precipice of the Pacific Theater opening, it was written, directed, and produced while Japan was already engaging in a full-scale war against China. The thought didn't occur to me while I was watching until there was one brief second where a map can be seen on the wall displaying Japan, Korea, Manchukuo, and northern China. Then it goes away. The details are hard to make out, but it's enough to remember the context. While these characters live comfortable domestic lives dealing with the issues and hassles that come with it, the empire is expanding, the empire that these very lives are built upon. And what's terrifying is that it isn't so different from how I live. While I don't have to deal with direct censors obscuring information, the truth of ongoing horrors of humanity is present just outside my field of vision, horrors that I'm not only complicit in, but actively benefit from. Yet I carry on like all is dandy. Now, it's worth it to take a little deeper look into this film to refine this notion. Despite the war waging for 3 years, it is not mentioned, as it is inconsequential in their day-to-day lives. Instead, its core is a very emotional story concerning the young student Eiko, who is disliked by her peers and to whom the teachers generally keep their distance from. Her father is one of the school's largest donors, so they tend to not want to step on any toes. Nobuko's background is quite different from the other teachers, and even when she is informed of Eiko's heritage, she still decides that disciplining the disruptive child is the best choice. The kids need to be raised right, and this one is currently being ignored. And that is what's so fascinating about the character of Eiko, is that she so desperately seeks attention that she causes trouble. She doesn't know how to get good attention, so bad attention will do. What's ironic is that the action she pulls that makes Nobuko break protocol is one where she didn't even intend for the consequences that happened. While on a hike with the other students, she discreetly gets on a bus and gets off ahead, hoping to play it off as a joke. Instead, Nobuko notices she has disappeared from the group and starts a search with the entire class. Eiko's troubled life is handled with such care and understanding in the story, allowing for a very balanced movie where we aren't being told to hate Eiko. Neither does it mean we have to agree with their actions. Instead, this film does most exactly what stories should strive for: understanding. It's a striking contrast to Shimizu's next film, Introspection Tower. Introspection Tower was released in 1941, just before the onset of the Pacific War, and it definitely shows. The propaganda machine is running at its fastest pace yet. I have covered other Japanese propaganda films, such as Kurosawa's The Most Beautiful, and just because a film is a propaganda piece doesn't mean that it has nothing to offer. Introspection Tower isn't a direct propaganda piece. It isn't a war movie, but it definitely follows the criteria. While the reformatory school presented in the film is mostly a force of good, and actually does a really good job in handling the children, there are still questionable choices made. While it is good to sift out the more violent behavior from children, the school's emphasis on conformity, while still an ever-present concept even in modern Japan, is especially prevalent here. The movie once again features a relationship between a problem student, Tamiko, and a teacher trying her best, but this film has a lot more surrounding characters as well, and shifts focus between all of them. Unfortunately, I think this has the effect of weakening how the character Tamiko is meant to be viewed. Tamiko has lost her mother, and as such has been acting out. Her father cannot devote much time to her due to his work, and as such sends her to the reformatory school. It is clear that she was a spoiled child, and sees doing basic housework to be maid tasks. As the film progresses, we see her begin to take an appreciation of work, and not look down on it as a menial task. In fact, that's what most of the kids eventually come to in the course of this movie, and none of that is actually wrong within itself. The problem lies in the aforementioned conformity. Children are expected to wake up early each morning and bow to a portrait of His Majesty the Emperor. Along with this, it is clear that the compound doesn't actually allow a choice. There is no gate, but children will be apprehended if they try to run away. And when it comes to the construction of the canal to bring water to the compound, the children are very much compelled to participate. And I will examine this two ways. First, in a more positive light. When it comes to the construction of a ditch to let water flow to the compound, it is invariably a good act. While the children are compelled to perform the labor, or eat nothing but gruel, the children get to be a part of the labor and directly experience the benefits of labor. So they get to have the rare opportunity to enjoy work without the alienation of labor that we typically live with in the modern world. On the other hand, this is almost disturbing. I think we can generally agree that child labor is not a good thing, and while the school board was pushed into a position where they had to make a decision, it still doesn't bode well that the children are handling pickaxes and often faint while on the job. In the context of the movie, no kid is seriously injured, but that's only a piece of the fiction that this movie is. The movie shows off the power of working together, creating a community together, while at the same time these kids have been abandoned. The reason the school board chooses to make them dig this ditch is due to the fact that they have no funding to hire an outside contractor to do the job. So, why are these children so neglected? The simple truth is that they do not conform to what is expected of them. I'm not here to argue against the benefits of schooling, but it is true that part of the reason for widespread schooling is to ensure a widespread culture. Before the Industrial Revolution, each area had its own distinct culture, even if it was part of a much larger culture. This is still true today, but to a much lesser degree. The issue with conformity is that not everyone will adhere to it. It is doubtful that the children in this movie act the way they do in spite of the national government or for anarchic beliefs, but they are reacting in relation to it. A kid must have utmost respect for their parents. A kid must attend school a certain number of days a week. A kid must exemplify the traits of their assigned gender, and so on. It is impossible to expect children to take this when a lot of them are just merely not made for that. And when they do act out, it isn't on us to change. No, it is on them. They must be forced to adhere. The only difference is that this compound just does so in a lighter, more subtle way. This movie is just a more subtle propaganda piece, highlighting the beliefs of its time in a matter-of-fact way, almost unquestionably. Even one of Tamiko's final lines in the film is lamenting on how she was a burden to her father, such a lively character now reduced to being like everyone else. A country gripped so strong by an ideology, and the children intuitively know something is off, but lack the knowledge to put that together. But soon enough the effects would be displayed. Children of the Beehive is a 1948 film by Hiroshi Shimizu, and I will be referencing it today in order to contextualize the previous pre-war examples. Like a lot of his other movies, it deals with childhood, except now there's the added weight of the conclusion of the Second World War. It follows a soldier and a group of young children navigating the immediate post-war Japan, unsure of what lies ahead anymore. The soldier has no family, and upon returning to Japan, realizes he has nowhere to go, and decides not to take the train back to Tokyo, unlike his comrades. He quickly befriends the orphan children, who ask where he came from, to which he responds by saying, all he had was a reformatory school, like the one in the movie Introspection Tower. Yes, this character references Shimizu's older movie, and I find that hilarious. The movie follows the soldier as he takes the kids across Japan, looking for work in order to survive, and generally only having potatoes to subsist on, all while trying to avoid the police. The soldier comes to find that the kids' true desires rest in being loved, and takes the initiative to bring them to the school that he himself was raised in. Unlike Kurosawa's post-war film, No Regrets for Our Youth, which is a direct condemnation of Japanese aggression, and whose protagonists are leftists, and where one of them is presented as being a moral agent of good for trying to sabotage the Japanese war effort, Shimizu's film does not make much of a direct statement on the war itself. Instead, it seems to show confusion. I find Kurosawa's film to be immensely important. The way it reframes the idea of who is actually working for Japan, to not be the militaristic leaders, but instead the people, the students who oppose the regime, and the farmers who carry the country to be the center of the story. The film, however, is a propaganda piece, of course. Films such as this were promoted by the occupying forces, for obvious reasons, and some things are simplified, such as the Kyoto protests. Though I do believe it was still very important in offering a totally different perspective to the conflict in Japan, opposed to what had been completely dominated by the militarists. It is a movie that grapples with Yukie's, the protagonist, initial dismissiveness of the world around her and complacency to rising fascism, before coming to realize what its implications actually are and what she decides to do in such a world. Shimizu's approach is lighter and more on par with how the war is generally depicted in Japanese media, being treated almost like a natural disaster, not one where the fault lies on Japanese society's willingness to engage in widespread conflict. Yet, Shimizu's take isn't any less valuable. The trope of focusing on children for wartime stories is prevalent in Japan, because children can't take the blame for what happened, and their victimization is rather compelling. But what must be come to terms with is that it wasn't not true. Regardless of what Japan did to other countries, the United States didn't treat its bombings any differently to how Japan would treat bombing China. It was just in the scale of what the US could do. So many children were left to die, and that cannot solely be put on the Japanese populace for being brainwashed. There were the people that did the bombing as well. Shimizu's film is not one that contains any hate. In fact, it is filled with humanity. I believe that this movie too is important in understanding how a society comes to terms with a disastrous event. The movie reflects a notion of post-war aimlessness, the observation that after the war, many people were left without loved ones, without homes, without jobs, even without purpose. When you are told for decades that your country will come on top, only for it to be brutally defeated in battle, it leaves a lot of people wondering what was next. Shimizu offers a way out, as he always does, positing that one does have the ability to take initiative, not for their own lives, but in actuality finding purpose and acting for someone else. The Mazuras and the woman ends with Toku going out of his way to save the woman, and Mr. Thank You, he gives up on trying to purchase his own business to save a friend, deciding that just because he is part of the world that sells women off, doesn't mean he has to stand by it any longer. At the end of Nobuko, they find their identities in relation to each other, student and teacher, parent and child. In Introspection Tower, community works for the shared benefit, and in Children of the Beehive, a lost soldier finds life in leading children to a better future. These movies ask us to question what we owe each other, but not only that, to question what we don't know about other people. What may come off as a bratty kid is actually a child in need. What we see as confidence may just be a wall to hide one's true self. Empathy is found when we let ourselves to be open, and are not so quick to judge people by whatever metric society deems desirable. Solidarity is not found by ousting people, but by coming together. If there's one lesson from Shimizu's pre-war films that we can gain, is that throughout it all, we are always human, wise in our own ways and ignorant in a million other ways.